Xander. This is me, and I'm a lot of things. I'm a human. I'm a resident of planet Earth. More specifically, I'm a Montrealer. I'm also an artist, a poet, a creator, and I'm a lot of other things too. In the summer of 2016, I was part of the Researching Discrimination Through Poetry project, led by Helen Johnson. I worked as part of a collective of 7 young spoken word artists, and together we participated in masterclass workshops, social science theory lectures, writing, editing, and research exercises, as well as countless group discussions. At the end of the summer, we printed a chapbook of poetry from the project and put on a live spoken word show at the Mainline Theatre. Over the course of this 6-week project, we worked together to explore our personal experiences of discrimination and privilege by making connections between personal experiences and the culture that manifests them. In our research, we learned that the personal and the political aren't mutually exclusive. By engaging with theories and methods of participatory arts-based research, we came to understand how to use poetry as a lens for our personal experience, to bring clarity to the world around us. We learned how art and science can work together to inform, educate, empower, and heal. For me, this was particularly powerful. Having struggled with chronic mental illness my whole life, I had a lot of personal experience with the institutions of academic psychology and psychiatry. And much of my experience being in the mental health system was extremely upsetting, traumatizing, and sometimes oppressive. I just wasn't treated like a person. The psychologists and psychiatrists that worked with me always seemed to be running me up against a checklist of symptoms to determine my diagnoses or my treatment. It just was all very quantitative, cold, and clinical. I'd always felt that there was something missing. Learning about qualitative and participatory research gave me the missing link. It gave me room to question what I had been taught about my own psychology. It empowered me to find my own understanding of who I was, outside of diagnostics. This project was an experience of growth for me on so many levels. It pushed me as an artist, as an individual, as an advocate and ally for oppressed communities. I learned so much about myself and the world around me, and I was able to convey these new understandings through creative and research-based work that I never would have thought myself capable of. Honestly, I can't shut myself up about how important this kind of research is. But I only have so much time, so I'm going to tell you a story. I hope that through sharing my experience, I can give you a sense of the impact that this work can have on a personal, political, and world level. This is how I wrote the poem I Couldn't Write. This is the story of sugar. It's Sunday, July 17th, and we're in our second week of project work. This is the day we had our first masterclass workshop, led by the wonderful Tanya Evanson. In one exercise, a guided meditation, she had us return to the memory of a time we had experienced discrimination firsthand. Tanya helped us build ourselves into a vivid, detailed, and immersive recollection by bringing our focus to the space around us and the energy of the moment. She asked us to return to the experience not only through visualization, but through our senses of smell, touch, and taste. We were asked not only to reflect on the things that were said, but the things left unsaid. This meditation was an intense and challenging experience for me. The memory I'd returned to was traumatic. It was one I'd been reliving constantly through PTSD flashbacks. I had been struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'd been in therapy for years. I'd made lots of progress in therapy, but this trauma had proved to be a consistent roadblock in my path to healing. Many health professionals I worked with were really focused on this, and they tried to help me connect to this experience in order to allow healing. But I'd never been able to return to this memory voluntarily, in my mind or in my writing. This exercise got me there, and it let me feel safe and in control the entire time. It got me to go where no therapy had been able to bring me, and it let me heal like I'd never known I could. After returning to the present, we were given a few moments to free write from our experience of the meditation. Tanya proposed some editing techniques which we applied to our pieces individually. At the end of the exercise, I'd written the first draft of the most important piece of writing I do throughout the project. This was sugar. Be in a car, not inside or out. Where does it hurt? Inside or out? How many children are screaming? Inside or out? Feel the empty space of a back seat. Smell him. Hands and hair. Salt and sweat and everything else. Inside and out. Swear. Ask for a cigarette. How sweet it tastes by comparison, turning breath and body gray. Inside and out. He hesitates, protests, asks how you think he must feel. Become a mirror. Hope he sees nothing. How sick he is when he looks at you. Filthy. Inside and out. This was the story I couldn't tell, the poem I couldn't write. When I read it for the first time, I knew this was an important piece. I felt it in my chest, this overwhelming sense of control and power in having put the words on paper. I shared this with the group as we discussed our experiences of the workshop, and I found that I wasn't the only one who had had really intense feelings come out of this exercise. Discrimination is a heavy subject after all, and this was an extremely personal project. The work we were doing was just as delicate as it was intense. This led to a conversation about how we can self-care when we're writing about trauma. In the meditation, I learned that art could heal, but art can hurt us too. I wanted to write poems that would bring hope, healing, and a sense of understanding to my audience. But often when writing about painful things, I get stuck there. Writers and our tendency to bleed onto a page and let it soak. Tanya brought my attention to the balance that needs to be found and created in ourselves as well as in the work itself by finding a narrative arc of healing. For me, this meant Sugar couldn't end where I had stopped writing. There had to be more, and there was. After all, so much healing had taken place since that moment in time, and I had to write that part of the story, so I did. I wrote an extended version of Sugar over the next few weeks, and in that process, I was healed more deeply. The poem also grew in its healing potential for an audience. In its new extended form, it could not only spread awareness about nuanced experiences of discrimination, but it could also bring hope to people who were struggling with similar emotions, oppressive forces, and difficult situations. This development helped me bring a new level of intention and awareness to the work that I create. Writing about trauma reopens wounds, whether we intend it to or not. And when we present a piece about trauma to an audience, we can open these wounds in them. As an artist, I believe I have a responsibility to take care of my audience if I'm going to ask them to bleed with me. My purpose is not to shock people or to pass my pain on to them. I want to be the vehicle for an experience of growth. I want to take you with me to guide you through my experience of trauma and healing. And by doing this, I hope to cultivate understanding, awareness, and empathy. I don't want to just tell people what I've learned. I want to teach it. While Sugar is a poem about healing, it's also a poem about consent. It's fueled by intense emotional reactions to being trapped and controlled. I wanted to communicate this energy in my performance without subjecting the audience to my trauma. This raised a lot of questions for me about the responsibility we have as artists to create safe spaces to present our work, and the idea of a consenting audience. After Tanya's workshop, we had talked about how we could incorporate self-care into the project framework. We agreed as a group that there would be no pressure on participants to share anything they didn't feel ready to, and that if someone needed to take time away from the project, or to leave it entirely at any point, this need would be understood and their decision respected. For me, this extended beyond just the research collective. At our show, we were blessed with a wonderful audience, made up of family, friends, and strangers. all of whom faced oppression and privilege in infinitely nuanced ways, just like myself and my co-researchers. I felt that every individual in this audience had a place as a participant in this project, and that this right to withdraw, supported by the idea of self-care, should apply to them too. To me, this was a matter of ethics, and more specifically, a matter of consent. As a performer, it's my responsibility to ensure that the audience receiving me is able to give informed, ongoing, and enthusiastic consent. Trigger warnings are how we inform the audience of the content of the piece they're about to see, so that they can choose to opt in or out before being exposed to our work. But there's no way to perfectly prepare an audience for what they're about to see, so a trigger warning alone isn't always enough. By giving the audience express permission and instruction on how to leave the performance while it's in progress, we empower them to withdraw their consent at any time. Before the show, I had been worried about how people would react to Sugar. It wasn't an easy piece to write or to perform, and I knew it definitely wouldn't be easy on an audience. So I prepared the introduction for Sugar with this in mind. I knew people might feel the need to leave partway through the performance, and they did. At least 2 good friends of mine had to step out of the room. It's difficult to have people walk out of your performance, whether you're expecting it or not. But what's the alternative to letting people leave? Forcing them to sit through it and relive my trauma as well as their own? Or not performing the piece at all? Neither of these options sat well with me. The idea of an empowered and consenting audience allowed me to share my experience without having to water it down or censor myself, but also without forcing it on anyone. I stand by my decision to perform Sugar. Sharing my experience through performance was a transcendental, spiritual, healing experience for me, and I received a lot of positive feedback on it after the show. I did my best, and I can only hope the awareness and healing that Sugar brought me was passed on to my audience through my performance, and that through this story, you got a sense of it too. Art is many things. It's a form of expression, it's education, it's a channel for beauty and emotion, it's creation. For me though, art is really about being a vessel for something bigger than myself. Call it consciousness, call it God, call it love, call it life, whatever. All we have is our experience and a calling to share it. Let's hope the message gets through.